I am Pastor J. Dylan Proctor here at the Nazarene Stream Preacher, formerly known as Holy Moonlight Crusaders. And yes, I am wearing those awesome stunter sunglasses over here. If you're going to be looking ridiculous, you might as well do it in style. I've got my Swatch watches on because no one gets into Swatch watches to wear just one. We're going to be here having a good time, and we're going to talk some philosophy and theology while we play the Elder Scrolls. And of course, this is Elder Scrolls Skyrim, one of my favorite games. I really wish they had Elder Scrolls Online on the Switch. I know it's a massive game. I've heard rumors and legends that there does not exist a micro SD card with the capacity to run Elder Scrolls Online. I don't know how much I believe that, but anyways. Well, thank you for joining me. We're going to be playing a little bit around this. We have choices to make, though. Choices to make indeed. As we go to do a few quests, and check out this kind of glitching dude here. Choices to make. Do we want to ride on this horse, or do we want to do something which is also pretty awesome and get down here and summon Aardvark, or however you pronounce his name. Alright. Can we summon him? The undead horse from another realm. Yes, Aardvark. Let's roll. Okay, so, you know, in our world right now, we do live in a time where there's pretty obviously going on a battle of belief systems, right? You can look around the world right now, and the very basic definitions of how we exist are kind of something which is thrown up in the air. You know, what is good, what is evil? And this is a very particular conversation that one has to have. And we really do need to have this because it hits at the core of who we are as people. We are hardwired to make moral decisions and to view things really in terms of morality. And even for people who do jobs and they work in occupations where there is a high appreciation for logic and reason, typically in our personal lives, we find things to be more beautiful the more moral they are. It's something which has sort of an ethical connotation. And whenever somebody has some sort of quality in life where, say, they have an antisocial personality disorder, which antisocial doesn't mean shy, it more or less means violent. We tend to see that as very cold and a little bit standoffish. I have never found anybody in life that truly is cold and calculating in all things that they do. And even people who are on that antisocial spectrum, they still have their own wants and their own desires, which aren't always entirely logical. So I say all of that to say that we are hardwired to be religious as people, to navigate through this world using belief systems. And one of the problems that we have going on in our modern day and age is that it is very obvious that there is a battle of belief systems going on. Basic truths like what is a man, what is a woman, are not even commonly held throughout our society. And when you get to that central to who we are as people, there is going to be some serious problems going on. And it does ask a lot of questions. And when we look right now in our culture, it's pretty obvious that there is a new belief system which is coming to really seize and take control. And I came up with a word here recently, and yes, this is quite a majestic horse tradesman, Tyler. I came up with a word, and it wasn't a word that I just wanted to come up with out of nowhere. I realized that when you look at the world right now, there is a alternative belief system to the Christian tradition, which has really guided American, some of the ideals. People didn't always live up to the ideals, but again, it wasn't so much that they were having different sets of morality that they thought were good. It was that they were fallen people trying to aspire to something higher. Well, it's pretty obvious right now we have an alternative set of belief systems. This idea that people are naturally good, that you can separate people out in different groups and give different amounts of guilt to different people based on who they are. There's this idea that says you get to live out your truth. You know, if you decide something is one thing, then it is, and it's the whole world's fault if you don't live up to that. Well, some very serious questions that we have in our life is, how do we deal with this? How do we navigate through this? And we have to realize that for a long time here in the West, we have kind of believed that people are moved by debate and reason more than they actually are. People are only swayed by debate and reason when you actually have some a priori premises that you're all kind of holding together in common. When you take away those common truths, people no longer are very much interested in debate and reason because they just will throw things out the window. They don't have eyes or ears for truth. Well, one of the things which has come to my mind is, how do we minister to people in a world like this? How do we actually get people to change their minds? How do we actually find truth? And the word that I've come up with is the sort of the opposite of orthodoxy. So when you think of orthodoxy, to break that word down, it means ortho and then dox. Ortho means straight, and then dox means, you can say it means divine presence. It means divine revelation. But in the general way that we use the word orthodoxy in society, it kind of means the straight or correct teaching of virtue. So orthodoxy is sort of the correct teaching of virtue. Well, what we have going on now, this opposing alternative belief system, it too has its very strict rules, and when people attack it, they do not agree with what it is asserting. People will get very belligerently angry. They'll act like you blasphemed in front of them. And I just died because I didn't have my correct weapon set out. But we have something being enforced in our society now that is not really orthodoxy in the sense that it is a straight or correct teaching of virtue. What we have is something that I've called Scolidoxy. And scoli is a Greek word which kind of means the opposite of ortho. Ortho is straight, and scoli means bent. So you think of like scoliosis that one might have with their spine. Your spine is not straight. And what we have right now is a set of fake virtues, as I call them, but what people hold as virtues and beliefs that are very fickle. They change very quickly. When you look at our society right now, where people are at now is very different from where they were 10, 20 years ago. And even people who are asserting these beliefs, people have gone very radically towards the movement of socialism and anarchy, but the things that they are asserting and the things that they are using to justify all of this for would have not been tolerated in society, 10, 20 years ago. And even the same people who do this, they would blaspheme against themselves if they saw themselves at the 2 points in time. People would not get along with themselves. But nonetheless, they're very strict in enforcing their set of virtues. So I have decided to call, there is orthodoxy, which is the long-standing traditions which are larger than you, that you do not get to decide what they are. And then there's the Scolidoxy, which is anything but straight, and it is the sets of beliefs and virtues that you do have some control over. You can bend them to be what you want. And our culture right now is racked with this Scolidoxy that is at war with a orthodoxy. And most people are kind of caught somewhere in between. They're caught in between the Scolidoxy and the orthodoxy. And we can see this when it comes to just about any issue at hand. When you look at stuff going on with Black Lives Matter, there'll be people who say, well, there are issues that go on with race, but then there are also riots, and there are people who are out there lying, and there really are two competing worldviews trying to interpret the same set of events. And it's becoming increasingly obvious that truth itself is not the center that people will naturally gravitate to as seeing the common good. The Scolidoxy, which is out there in the world, wants to reject truth itself, and it doesn't want to find that common good. It wants to basically do what it wants to do. And this is not something which is new throughout human history, but I did want us to talk a little bit about today. How do you actually transform people and get them to come towards the truth? How do you get people interested in truth when we have so many people in our society who are just utterly uninterested in truth? It's as if truth is offensive to them. And you find out quite often that truth is offensive to a lot of people. If you talk about the basic noble design of men and women, you'll find out very quickly that there are a lot of people who find it offensive to state the basic facts of our noble design. Now, this is not something which is really unique to the modern world, but it is something which has kind of come back to another peak. It's something which kind of oscillates throughout time. And for us to examine this, I want us to actually go to the Gospel of Luke chapter 7, and I want us to see how Jesus deals with a Roman who has some degree of influence and authority there in the Roman world. So he's someone who's a totally different worldview. He would not see truth the same way that Jesus sees truth, or the Jewish people. But he has a metaphysical crisis in his life which causes him to come and see truth. And in fact, whenever we see how people do come to see truth and real truth, you can't just debate people into it. You can't just reason with people into it, especially when the common held tools of reason, logic, these things have been outcast. They have been said they're oppressive tools, and that's where we're at now. The only way that you can really get people to see something different is with a total change that is a metaphysical change. So like a transformation of their worldview, their core beliefs, things of that nature. And really the only way that people are receptive to that is if there is an opening. If there's some sort of opening in their life which resets their brain to the point where they are willing to consider things that they didn't previously hold true. Now, a crisis moment will generally do this. I don't think it has to be a crisis moment from my personal experience. Sometimes there are other variables that come in and people have their hearts and minds opened. But when we look in Luke 7, there is a Roman whose servant, a servant that he's very fond of, has got to the point of death and dying. And there's sort of this crisis moment which comes upon this man. And he looks to the world around him. Again, he's not a Jewish man, though he is living in a Jewish world. And he sees that there is this Rabbi Jesus. And just to take a brief moment away from our game to come over here and read this. It says, this is Luke chapter 7:1, by the way. It says, "Now when he had concluded all these things in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant, who was dear to him, was sick and ready to die. So when he," this being the centurion, "heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying, that one for whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation, and he has built us a synagogue. Then Jesus went with them. And when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying, Lord, do not trouble yourself. I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore I did not even think myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. And saying to one, Go, and he goes, and to another, Come, and he comes. And to my servant, Do this, and he does it. Now, when Jesus heard these things in verse 9, he marveled at them, and he turned around and said to the crowd that followed them, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And those who were sent, returning to the house, they found that the servant who had been sick was now well. Okay, so this is an important text to read when we ask the question of how is truth found in the middle of a battle of belief systems. Because ancient Rome, in the time that Jesus walked the face of this earth, there was a big amount of turmoil going on between the beliefs of Rome and the beliefs of the Jewish people, and then eventually the beliefs of the Christians as things unfolded. So how did the early church bring in new converts who did not start looking at the world the same way that the Christians did, or the Jewish people might? You know, the way you might evangelize to Jewish people is going to be quite different than the way you evangelize to Romans. So how do we find truth in the midst of all this? Well, when you see there with the centurion, there was a crisis. The man had some seeds planted in life, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted us to look at this story. He had already had some inner workings with the Jewish people, so he had had some seeds planted where he was kind of familiar with their belief systems. He had built them a synagogue. We don't know for sure whether or not he was what would be called a God-fearer. In the ancient world, there were centurions and Romans who did attend the synagogues. They were called God-fearers. They were not Jewish people, but they had come to worship in the synagogues with some of the Jewish people. We don't know a lot of this man's history, but we know there were some seeds planted. And beyond the seeds being planted, we know that there was a crisis moment which caused him to have that metaphysical opening where he was willing to come to Jesus. And that is one of the things that we've got to start looking for. So often we think that the great tool to have people have a transformation in their life is to kind of just go and reason and debate with them. As a young pastor, when I first was coming out of the university about 10 years ago and started pastoring, you know, my mentality was, if I can just preach well-reasoned, well-articulated sermons, you know, that will bring people to God. It was not the case, and I kind of had a reality check. And I had to learn very quickly that's not the case. You can't just listen to people's stories because there's a lot of people who want to be manipulative and take over of that. You know, Jesus himself, he doesn't just listen to the devil in the wilderness and obey whatever the devil wants him to do. The way that you love people and the way that you get them to have their heart and mind changed is by looking for that metaphysical opening. And sometimes we can do things to help push that. And this isn't just being manipulative, but to help point people in that direction. I mean, we're not out here to cause crises upon people. There are a multitude of ways that this sort of thing can happen. Just like there's a multitude of ways to get up this mountain, and I have yet to find the correct one. Climbing a mountain in Skyrim is a bit like trying to find a metaphysical opening. And this is something we're not trained to do. But it's also something which is very obvious that we have going on in the world right now. When you see how people react to something simple like saying, you know, men are men and women are women, seeing how people would react to that, they do react as if they've watched blasphemy. And I would define blasphemy as calling good evil and evil good when you confuse the two. And people who have bought into, they've been worked over and had the Scolidoxy of our modern day and age instilled in them, this sort of non-straight version of virtue, the people who have been worked over by that, they still have their metric of good and evil, although it's a flawed and wrong one. Whenever they hear something that, you know, challenges that or redefines good and evil for them, they get mad, they think it's blasphemy, and they kind of shut down. You can't debate with that, you can't reason with it. But we can hone our tactics to where we are looking for these metaphysical openings. And that's what we've got to do. Just like right now I'm trying to find this opening in this game, which I really thought, you know, playing Skyrim would be fun. Just go do a little quest. I didn't realize it would be like try to go across the mountains and find something. So that's really the conversation I want to have happen with this, is how we can start looking for metaphysical openings. And, you know, I should use a simpler language than that. Openings that really come deep within how people view the world. And for the centurion, when his servant is dying, you know, it's something which totally opens his eyes. He becomes awakened and more sensitive to deeper matters, deeper spiritual matters, belief system matters, things that are more than just what we would typically put in the spiritual realm, but also things of simple meaning and joy. It really is something which is all-encompassing in life, the non-tangible things of life, which are so important to us, but are so often overlooked. We have to get people to that place where there is an opening, at that critical mass deep within one's being, that opening there that is willing to see something different. You know, that's not easy to do. It's not easy to do at all. And it's something which we don't have total control over, in the sense that, you know, we can't just rewrite someone else's brain. And quite frankly, I wouldn't want us to, because then we wouldn't be living in God's creation. We're all clocks to be reprogrammed here and there, then, you know, wound up and set the time, reprogram, put a new driver in there like you're a computer. You know, there's not a lot of meaningful life going on there. But to find these openings deep within the soul, these fissures where people are a little uncertain and they're looking for that certainty, that is something we have to look for. And that's really where we're at. So I know Tradesman Tyler is here in the chat. He's brought up his term coincidental catastrophe. You know, that we have so many euphemisms in our modern day and age. It really is quite tragic how the euphemisms have taken over our world. We don't talk about stuff as it actually is. We just like to avoid it. And man, this is going to be a hard location to get to. We have to get up this mountain. And I have yet to find a good passage up it. But the Scolidoxy... You know what? I have another conversation I want us to have about the Scolidoxy real quick. A lot of the beliefs that are tearing apart our nation right now, they're not well developed. when you look at a lot of the tenets which come with modern social justice ideology, which is to be distinguished from, say, 1960 civil rights movement, a lot of the modern social justice mentality is, blame mass groups for having privilege, and instead of having aspirations, you just want to tear people down and have people at the lowest common denominator. There's this idea that certain groups have voices that need to be heard, but you only need to listen to them if they match up with the Scolidoxy. If they want to have a point counter to that, you ignore them and you call them names and have them removed. We have this whole mentality where you really do, instead of being moved by principles, you're moved by feelings. Instead of having the truth, you have your truth. And a lot of this stuff is easy to debunk. Very easy to debunk. But we have to be conscious in our minds that just because it hasn't been forced to debate and defend itself, don't think that it has gone untested. And this is something we have to really set our minds on. This stuff has actually been tested quite a bit. It just hasn't been debated or reasoned. As the Scolidoxy has grown in its power, it has been tested by what will not be held accountable. And forgive my imperfect use of language here to try to articulate this concept, but whenever the Scolidoxy has gone out, it has morphed and it has shifted and changed, always to figure out how it cannot be held accountable. In other words, when it went out and it saw that, people were naturally, because we're made in the image of God, we're naturally sinful, but there are virtues that people install into their lives, and it saw this push and pull between being created in the image of God and being a sinner. And the Scolidoxy realized that those who have virtues, they will want to listen to those who are victims. So, it tried to always brand itself in a way that couldn't be held accountable. You look at modern society, things like Twitter, you can only use so many characters. That is bent towards only a certain amount of thinking and certain amount of critical thinking to be permitted there. The Scolidoxy, which is ripping apart our culture, it has been tested through all of these filters to make sure that no one can really hold it accountable. And when you look at our modern political systems, the people that are really allowed to come into those systems and to stay and remain and thrive, they're not people who are really crusading for good and the righteousness of God, but they are often crusading for something that will move in the direction that the spirit of our age wants, that the belief systems of this moment want, that will move in the direction, really, of the Scolidoxy. The Scolidoxy has been very good at refining itself where nothing can hold it accountable. And for people who are somewhere in the middle, they're not really interested in biblical orthodoxy, nor are they interested in being a radical revolutionary. This Scolidoxy, which is the radical revolutionary side of things, it has crafted for itself a worldview that people will by default fall into if they are not taught otherwise. It's kind of like the way of death that is referenced there in the Didache. It is the default setting in life, and if you live in the year 2020, the default way that the way of death manifests is in the Scolidoxy. And you get born, you fall into this, and there's not a lot you can do about it. And that is very, very tragic. The only antidote to that is knowing on the Lord Christ Jesus and being saved. So as we talk about all this stuff, and it looks like I finally have got up here, though, I wanted to go just a little bit further. We do have to realize... Oh, I need to pull this out. Will let me set my marker. There we go. Yeah, the Scolidoxy is not something that's going to be easy to fight. It's not going to be easy to fight at all. But we're going to have to find moments like when Jesus deals with the Roman centurion, or really whenever you see Jesus deal with these people, a lot of times they do come to him in crisis moments, but that's not always the case. You do find some people who, for whatever reason, are at a point in their life where they're open to consider different beliefs, and that ultimately takes them to a real objective truth. You know, I think of Acts chapter 16, where Paul, he and his crew of ministry, they go down and they meet Lydia, and they preach to her, and they do it so casually there at the next to the river as they're all going down to wash, and good things happen. You know, for some reason, Lydia, she's one of those unique people who is willing to hear the story of the gospel. And you do find other people who are uniquely in that situation, but a large majority of them are people who kind of need that crisis moment. They need some phenomenal moment, and maybe it could be a miracle that does that as well, but some sort of extraordinary moment which really opens their eyes to consider something different. And we're going to have some of those in our modern day and age, because I think what we're up against is so powerful. It has largely not been held accountable to reason or to debate, and a lot of the ideas fall apart, but it is nonetheless powerful, and it has been tested. It has been tested through the lenses of what will prevent it from being held accountable, and it has been very successful in developing itself and honing itself to such a degree where nothing will hold it accountable. And for a while, I didn't have a name for its mechanisms, but now we have the term Scolidoxy. So send me your thoughts, questions, comments, how you feel about that. Scola, meaning crooked, bent, the opposite of straight. Doxa, kind of meaning the teaching, instruction, the revelation of God, the revelation of virtue. The spirit of the age, the belief system of our modern day and age, it doesn't have an orthodoxy, but a Scolidoxy. It can change in an instant, and if you don't go along with it, you will be considered blasphemous, you will be ridiculed, mocked, canceled. It's all very, very destructive. Man, we got a little something for him. Check this out, y'all. We're gonna slow down time. Oh man, he's tough though. And he exploded. Nothing quite says fun like being in Skyrim, blowing up some Drugers. Oh, by the way, this is being the Switch version. It has some really cool stuff in it, such as the Master Sword, which is what my character has right now. And just putting these away so you can see some cool stuff here. You can put on the Champion's tunic. They look like Link. I think it was a bit of a weird choice for Nintendo for the Breath of the Wild entry to the Zelda series to use blue. They really wanted to mess with the formula a little bit, and they even did that with the aesthetics of Link's marketed clothing. Again, you can wear whatever you want in the game, but the way he's kind of marketed, it's always wearing this blue tunic. I kind of thought that was a little weird. Everybody's always afraid of being cliche and typecast. It's like actors that are scared of being typecast. One of the funniest TV shows that was ever put out there was Keeping Up Appearances, which is a British comedy from the 90s. The lady that was the main character in that was so afraid of being typecast, she wanted the show to end. It hasn't done anything since, and that's basically what happens with people. They don't want to be typecast, and they don't want anything ever again. Sad. Sad, sad, sad. Oh, yeah. We've got to find a word of power in here, in case anybody's curious about what our quest is down here in this dungeon. Which, of course, I'm in my home studio, which looks a little bit like a dungeon. Redone part of the house. It is not a CGI backdrop behind me. It is food. I'm gonna redo it. Oh gosh, yep, that went poorly. Well, anyway, we finally got to a place where there's actually a dungeon to do something interesting, so we'll pick up here later. But I did want to just talk about how we change minds. How do we pull people from the Scolidoxy to orthodoxy? And the answer to that is quite simple. It is done through looking for those openings that are deep within someone's heart, soul, and mind, metaphysical openings where people are interested in actually seeing change. and really capitalizing on them, looking for them, being hungry to find them in our mind, and not just thinking that debate and reason are sufficient, that you can just show someone evidence that history has shown us that's not the case, but to actually spend some time looking a little bit deeper. So that's where we'll wrap this up. So thank you for spending time with me. Again, I'm J. Dylan Proctor, the Nazarene stream preacher, and hopefully as things go on, I'll get a little bit better at this. Y'all bear with me. My brain only works at a certain percentage while playing a game and trying to talk about stuff and run all this software at the same time. Well, on that note, I hope that the Lord is with you and that you have joy in life.